Hi, my name is Shahid, and you're listening to the Us People's podcast with Savia Rocks.
Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the Us People podcast. I'm your host, Savia Rocks, and today I have Shahid here with me, who is a data scientist. Hey Shahid, how are you?
Not bad, yourself?
I'm not too bad. Thank you so much for coming on the Us People podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, the first thing I normally do ask people is about their upbringing and their background of where they came from. Could you explain to me a little bit about your upbringing and your background and how that influenced you into being a data scientist? Because I know just before we started recording, you were in film before, so you've actually transitioned over. So maybe that's something we can also implement into the question as well of why you kind of transitioned over to be a data scientist. But let's start with your upbringing and your background first.
Sure. So, pretty unremarkable. Grew up in East London, still around these parts. To be honest with you, it's a pretty unremarkable upbringing. You know, the usual churning through the education system and living life, getting to know the world, or what I thought the world was. I don't know. I mean, maybe you could ask me a few more questions. It's pretty run-of-the-mill stuff. Went to an all-boys school, which sometimes people find a bit unusual because they associate that with a private education, but it wasn't. It's one of the, I guess there aren't many now, but it still remains one of the, publicly funded regular public school, just happens to be an all-boys school. Yeah. Did 2 years of college, started with 5 A levels, dropped 2, ended up with 3. And then after that point, worked a gap year. Yeah. So I worked as an architectural model maker. Yeah. As all things. So again, completely different to film and everything else I've done. So I spent a year doing that, which was quite interesting. And just as a quirky point, where I work now, I can actually see a building, which I built a model for back in 2009. So it's kind of weird seeing that building. I spent 3 months making a model of it for the architects I worked at, and now I can actually see that building every day. So after the gap year, went to university, studied aeronautical engineering, which again seems very different to everything else. But I had a long-standing passion for, I would use the word passion here, for aviation and flying. So I wasn't particularly sure what I wanted to do at university. To be fair, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to go to university, but I did go to try it out. I figured if I'm going to do it, pick something that I have an interest in. So aeronautical engineering was the way to go. Mm-hmm. One thing led to another, which I guess we'll get into when we talk about the rest of the journey. But hopefully that's given you some kind of idea.
Yeah, most definitely it has. How was your family towards you when you were going into your education? Did they push you? Because I know every family is different. I know every culture is different when it comes to education. But how was your family towards you when you said that you wanted to do a particular thing, but then go into another field?
So to clarify a point, when you say do a particular thing, but go into another field, what specifically are you referring to?
I mean, in the sense of for you to be able to go into, so you went to university.
Yes.
And in university, what exactly did you study?
Aeronautical engineering.
Okay. So you done that and then you came out, but then you done film.
Yes.
How did your family feel towards that? Because you have a degree. Yes.
So to be fair, they've never generally expressed strong views on things. That they felt an education was important. So at a point in time when I was kind of expressing the desire to not go university, there was a bit of not pushback, but kind of encouragement in that direction from various family members, which is understandable, right? However, funnily enough, what actually got me to consider university and put in the applications a little bit late was actually one particular family member who has gone through university and done the whole hog, who said, look, I get where you're coming from, but why not just try it out? And if you don't like it, drop it. And I thought, actually, sod it, why not, right? I mean, it's better to maybe try it. There's no You know, it's not like you walk in through the door and that's it. You're in a jail cell for 3 years.
Yeah.
I know some people feel that way, but it's not actually the case. And that's actually what got me there, really. It wasn't, you know, it was just like, yeah, let's just try this out. And things
kind of fell into place.
Happened from there. Yeah, happened from there. As to actually working in film, as we might discuss later on, that was a very serendipitous event. It wasn't intended. It wasn't planned. Various things happened that led to it happening, and it all kind of spiraled completely out of control from there. So, yeah, that wasn't actually, I never, you know, I kind of dabbled with shooting with like little films with my friends as a kid and stuff like that, but nothing serious. There was no overt desire to work in film or to do anything with film. It happened to me, which, yeah, it's interesting. I have friends and I know people who strive for years and years to break in. Is very difficult. I was fortunate, lucky, coincidental, however you want to put it, to have a skill set which was very much in demand at that time and still is in demand to a degree, although perhaps not quite in the same flavor as it was when I got involved. Specifically, I was the fancy term would be aerial cinematographer. The less fancy term would be drone pilot. So I would design and build and fly drones for film sets and TV productions and whatever have you, right? If you need a camera in the air, generally you want to go for the drone look. You know, I was your guy. So that started in late 2012. That's when that journey started. So a few months after graduating from university. But prior to that, I had about, I'd say 10 years of flying and doing lots of radio controlled airplanes. And so I was already very familiar with the actual flying of and the technical side of radio controlled flying machines generally. So in those 10 years, I'd been doing lots of radio controlled flying at a competitive level as well. I'd ended up writing for a few magazines on the topic. So in the sort of UK and perhaps somewhat the international stage, I was a known person. So I had a lot of experience, which meant that when it came to doing the drone stuff, it was very natural for me. So, you know, I was like, yeah. And at that time, it seemed like there weren't that many people, at least that I was aware of. I mean, they were out there, but generally, so if you've got someone who wants to do drone filming, or at least want to do drone filming at that point, who knew nothing about radio controlled aircraft, you know, they might go and purchase something off shelf or do some bits and pieces like that. At that time, there were limitations, and I don't know if there still are, but there might still be, as to how big a camera you could use and various things. And also just the raw skill set of being able to fly the drone and put it into unusual scenarios and situations, you know, just having the raw flying ability to maybe push the envelope a little bit. But whereas I've been doing radio controlled aircraft for 10 years, I was like, oh, you want a drone to lift that camera? Yeah, I'll build it. Or something would break on set. Yeah, I can fix that. So it's all those skill sets that kind of, you know, would churn things along, because we were able to fly the bigger cameras like Reds with cinema lenses to a degree, which a lot of people couldn't or didn't want to get into. So, you know, going a step beyond the DSLR cameras like Canon 5Ds. 5D is a beautiful camera, by the way, but a lot of people no, we want a Red camera in the air. Yeah, okay, that we can do that. And it actually peaked at one point where we flew two Reds together side by side for stereoscopic 3D, which was an IMAX production.
Oh my gosh, that's pretty cool. How important do you feel education is, especially within what you do? How do you feel? Do you feel that people do need to have an education, or do you feel like if you have the talent, you do not need to have education?
So yeah, that's a very good question. So let me think about this one for a moment. So I guess it would depend on, first and foremost, how you or I or anybody else might define education.
Very true.
I do have views on, for want of a better term, the education system. I'm not saying that, oh, this is a system and, you know, there's some conspiracy theory behind it to make us all into drones. But I by the same token, I don't, and drones as in, you know, drones as in mindless people, not as in we all turn to flying machines. That'd be quite interesting. But I don't, put it to you this way. If somebody has a formal education, higher education, a degree, whatever have you, I tend to not let that or necessarily immediately come to the conclusion that, oh, this person's done a degree, therefore they're going to be XYZ. They're going to be more open-minded or the ability to think critically. No, I don't think that at all. Education has, without putting a good or bad spin on it, it has a very practical purpose in the world in which we inhabit, in our immediate surroundings. You know, it helps you get a job, blah, blah. Do I think that should necessarily be the case? No. You know, I don't. And there are people I've met, some friends of mine come to mind who do not have a formal higher education, who work in incredibly technical jobs for some very well-known institutions, which never in a million years anyone would believe that's possible, but they are out there. So, yeah, it depends what you mean by education. Formal education, yeah. So let me try. I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but I guess people are who they are. In my experience, whether you have a PhD or not doesn't necessarily will for me. I don't see a strong link between that and someone's ability. Well, and who someone is, right? You can get people who have 10 years of higher education, who work in postdoctorate fields, who can be incredibly dogmatic and closed-minded to various ideas. Yeah. You have people who don't have any formal education, who, for again, like you could argue, are very, very street smart, right? You know, they might not have all the book knowledge, but you put them in different situations that they've never been in before, and they have a pretty good ability to take a step back, analyze, and look at that situation and really take the world in. And that kind of ability, I guess I could say I put more emphasis and perhaps the word value on an awareness of the world than I do on academic credentials alone.
I like that answer. It will make people think. Another question I have for you is, for people who don't understand what a data scientist is, and I know we spoke about it a bit before, where you said to me, Savia, it's not as glamorous as it sounds. You know, it's not like that. But for people who don't understand what a data scientist is and does, could you elaborate and tell us a bit more about what you actually do?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. It's quite straightforward, really. A data scientist tries to extract meaningful patterns and information from data. Really, that's a very broad definition, but it pretty much is what data scientists do. Now, they may do that in the private sector, the public sector, you know, for whoever. But essentially, data scientists look at data and usually will be trying to answer some sort of question, right? That the organization they work for, or even them as individuals, is trying to explore. You know, straightforward example might be, if the business was to offer this, I don't know, loyalty program, how would that impact sales, right? Or what do we think might happen? Okay, so do we have some data on previous things or other related things? Sure. Okay, let's look at the data and try to extract try to get towards that answer. You might also try and use data to predict things. So you look at past patterns in that data and you try to use it to predict what will happen next. And everyone has a very, very clear understanding of this, because we all know about targeted advertising when we browse the internet, right? Or you go on Amazon suggests things to you based on what you bought previously. That's a form of prediction. You know, Tesco Club Card. Actually, Tesco, I believe, is still very respected and widely regarded, highly regarded in the sort of data science world, because Club Card was kind of one of the, again, my history on this is not so great, but my understanding is Club Card and the Tesco, loyalty programs, supermarkets, loyalty programs were some of the first practical applications of looking at large data sets and trying to figure out what are the things that people, if somebody's got these three things in their shopping basket, they might be probably going to buy this thing. Maybe we should offer them discounts on that thing that they tend to buy, and did very well for Tesco. So it's it doesn't always have to be, but it generally is a very practical thing. And in a business context, your data scientist ideally should be bringing in value, right?
Yeah, that's true.
However they help your bottom line, whether that's by generating more revenue or saving you costs or some other benefit, should ideally equal out, if not exceed, what their cost is. But that's me getting a little bit specific there, right? I guess what I'm saying is, in a practical context, in a business or where you have an organization with clear objectives, ideally your data scientists help you achieve those objectives and answer questions around those objectives without getting too sidetracked. Kind of just doing it for academic curiosity as opposed to a specific purpose.
No, that makes sense. How did you become interested in data science?
So that happened as a means of transitioning away from my film career for reasons we might get into later.
Yeah.
But one thing that kind of sparked an interest and stuck with me was talks that I'd seen from a guy called Hans Rosling. Okay. I believe he's passed away since, but very, interesting, colorful chap. Was a statistician, I believe. And there was a TED talk he did where he talks about, I won't get into the ins and outs of the specifics, but one of the things he touched upon was this perception of poverty in the world and world hunger and these kind of issues. And he goes, we have a perception of the world, but let's look at what the data says. Let's look at what, as best as we can ascertain, what is the record of reality? What's actually going on? And it was an optimistic thing, because it's like our perception is one thing, but all the evidence we have so far is kind of pointing that things are generally getting better and have been getting better for quite some time. And of course, that's not to say we shouldn't strive to improve things where we can. Absolutely not. It doesn't mean we just sit on our ass and do nothing, but it does mean that it's not perhaps as doom and gloom as we think it might be. Now, for me, it wasn't so much the optimism side of it. It was the idea that we have perceptions, and as I'm sure you kind of alluded to in our pre-chat, people have perceptions about the world, about all kinds of things.
Most definitely.
But does the evidence, as best as we can, gather the evidence in as unbiased a way as we can, does that necessarily back up what we think? And throughout my recent life, that's the question I've thought about quite a lot. What is, our perceptions of the way we think the world is, and our narratives and the things we perhaps dogmatically adhere to no matter what, versus, a more kind of, well, what has actually happened, right? What evidence do we have? And as looking at that in as kind of a dispassionate way as possible, does that really back up what we believe? Is it even relevant? So that sparked that was like the initial kind of the impetus towards pursuing that field.
Yeah.
So we're kind of skipping to the little different segment. So the way I did that to go from film sets to a data science career in finance is quite a big gap, right? On face value, the way I decided I was going to try and do that transition was to do a master's degree. So I did a 1-year master's degree in data science and machine learning to help transition, right? To sort of, get some academic credentials, because that's what people look for, and that's what helps, whether you agree with it or not. Whether you're a data scientist who's never been to university, who sits at home and does really good work, there's a game being played. You can choose to play it, you can choose not to play it, you can find different avenues. I just chose one that worked for me. And then as I went through the master's degree, one of the things that happened was, so I'd done statistics, like most of us have done statistics to some degree at secondary school level. You do your means, modes, your averages, that sort of thing. Some of us might then do a bit more if we go into A level. But I had a rudimentary understanding of statistics, a very basic understanding, a very mechanical understanding of statistics, like, oh yeah, this is what you calculate, and this is how you can measure things and kind of predict things, or get an idea of what's going on in the world. But it was actually at the master's level, statistics took on a whole completely different meaning. And the way I would say I view statistics now is it's more a philosophy than it is, unfortunately, the very boring subject that most people think it is, which I can totally get if it's put across in a very droll and very mechanical way, and you just want to get past those exams. I totally get that. But the lecturers we had on my master's course really did open a door for me as to, like, statistics is an attempt, well, for me, and maybe some of my friends who might listen to this somewhere down the line might cringe. But statistics really, for me, it's a lens, a way of viewing the world that truly tries to accept the world for what it is. And what I mean by what it is I mean, it's inherently unpredictable to a degree, right? We don't know a lot with certainty. We don't, I step out on the road, what might happen next? Yeah, there's certain odds on what might happen next, but there's an inherent uncertainty to the world. And so statistics is saying, yeah, the world's uncertain. Let's try and figure out some understanding of that and maybe some tools we can use to navigate that. And certain statistics introduced me more to the idea of doubt and the limitations of what we can know. And eventually that then further led on to a personal study and a continuing personal study of philosophy. And various philosophical thinkers, which I found so far very fulfilling and very interesting, because for me, various philosophers have actually tried to tackle the big questions, right? Whether you feel they succeeded or failed or managed to uncover something new or something useful, that's always up for debate. But those guys and girls, they're trying to tackle the really big questions. They're not necessarily just trying to say, oh, it's all like this and it's fine, and just don't think. That's fine, just move on. It's like, we all have I guess we all to some degree or another have moments in life where we start to wonder about, the big questions, or what is the meaning of it all, to put a kind of
most definitely
tropey example on it, right? But so it's interesting. It's kind of warped into this whole other thing. Again, kind of got off on a little bit of a ramble there, but hopefully that's answered your question in some shape or
most
form.
Definitely. The more knowledge you bring to the table, the more people will understand exactly what you do, because there are people out there who do want to do what you do, even if they're in the background, because most of the time you guys are in the background rather than being in the forefront of things, and you're giving the data which is making the company excel. But people don't know about you guys as much as the people in the front who are representing the company. I don't know if you agree or disagree with it, but you might have a different aspect on things when it comes to that.
I mean, so the field data science is quite strongly linked and kind of interspersed with machine learning, and then machine learning is kind of very strongly linked and interspersed with AI, and all these terms are used often very interchangeably. Now, AI, artificial intelligence, is a term that has come more to the fore as we see in popular culture, right? From the talk about, oh gosh, we got to worry about AI, it's going to take over and destroy us all, to you see all the time, right? Google using AI for this, Facebook using AI for that, and Tesla and everybody else, and yada, yada, yada. And again, I've got views on a personal level. I think that's a lot of the perception that there's these, well, first and foremost, I will say that that kind of language is used so often in media that it would not surprise me if a random person down the street thinks we've actually got real thinking machines that are like humans. Why? But that's not true. We don't have anything even remotely close to a sentient thinking machine. The AI algorithms that are often talked about in the media is one of the things I studied on my master's. They are still very dumb algorithms. Sometimes they can do very impressive things, but there is nothing thinking nor sentient about them. So I don't even know why I said that. I kind of riled something up in me.
No, it's good. I like it.
To link it back, I guess, the people working on these kind of problems and doing these things in businesses, if you're just a layperson, you might not be aware of them, but you certainly are aware of their work. I think just through all the things that come up in popular culture and the media every so often about this, there's an algorithm that can pick out these faces, and there's an algorithm AI that can do this or do that, and da 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 da. I'm not always saying it's very accurately reported, and I absolutely am saying there is an element of sensationalism and misunderstanding. Yes, but you could argue the work of people like that does come to the fore. To use some more specific examples, Google's DeepMind division, they often get a bit of press. Google DeepMind plays Go and beats all the world's masters and stuff, and that algorithm, and playing chess and other stuff like that. So there is, I think, a general kind of public awareness of this thing called AI and machine learning. Even, of course, they they won't fully grasp maybe what it is. And I'm not blaming them for that. I'm saying, you just read the headlines and read what the journalists write and you've kind of formed an opinion. Yeah. But there's some notion that companies are using this technology for various purposes and means.
How do you handle missing data? So say, for instance, you're doing something, but something isn't right. There's data missing. How do you handle that process?
There's numerous different techniques of how you might do that. So I won't go too much into the ins and outs, but I'll give an example that hopefully is somewhat intuitive. So I don't know, let's say you've got data on a bunch of, you have a shop or some retail business and you have data on a bunch of customers, people who signed up to your loyalty program or whatever have you, right? And, there's, age, gender, other bits and pieces like that. Actually, maybe this is not particularly great. I don't know. Let's just say you have let's step back from the retail example so let's just say you have a bunch of data which contains the physical characteristics of people, right? So like, hair color, eye color, height, weight, that sort of thing, right? Whatever that database might be. Maybe it's a medical thing, maybe you're in a hospital, but the specifics of where the database is coming from aren't that relevant. And let's say, for example, so for each person, you have all these different physical attributes. And let's say, I don't know, for every so often, somebody's weight is missing. So you might say, well, okay, I want to do some statistical analysis on this or do some other kind of task. And whatever that task is I want to do, I need to fill in, I need to get those missing values for weight filled in. So there's numerous different approaches, right? A very simple thing to do would be to say, well, if I don't know the weight of someone, let me just take the average of all the weights and stick that in. And you can do that. Let me take the most common value for weight, stick that in. You can do that. You might try and do something a bit more informed, right? If you have someone who, let's say the average weight of everybody in that data set was, let's say 60 kilograms, and you have a row for a 8-year-old child, 60 kilograms might be possible, but it might seem like it's a bit high or something, so, maybe I actually want to, if I know, what is the average weight or the median weight, if you want to use the median, there are reasons to do that. But let's say I use the average weight based on gender and, the age range. That might be a bit more informed. So you can do something very hands-on. You can also use, there's other techniques. One I've used in the past is the acronym for it is MICE, which I've been a while since I've looked into it, so I don't know the ins and outs, but that is an algorithm which tries to do a very thought through process of imputing missing data. To be fair, sometimes if you have a particular data set, you might decide, for every row, for every data point which has some missing data associated with it, I'll just leave them out. That's also a valid approach, right? Like, I think I had that discussion once with someone, or like a job interview I once had years ago. Someone said, what would you do with this? I was like, I'll try this, and this. It goes, okay, well, that's reasonable. But like, what if I told you it's 100 million rows of data, and I told you that 100 of them have missing values? You might just leave them out, right? I was like, well, yeah, maybe. In any analysis you do, I would say it's absolutely important you record every step you do very, very clearly. You know exactly what it is you're doing. So, because all of those decisions can absolutely influence where you end up at the end with any analyses or conclusions you draw. So always be very cognizant of the decisions you make, and never be afraid to revisit them or question them yourself.
What is the biggest data set that you've processed, and how did you process it? And what was the results as well?
I mean, there's data sets at my work which are hundreds of billions, probably hundreds of, yes, without a doubt, hundreds of billions of rows. I don't generally go across all of that. You'd often go across a subset. This particular kind of data, it's a time series. So it's about, things happen at points in time. So, this happened at this moment, this happened at this moment. And with each moment, there's a bunch of values you record, and that forms a time series database, right? So it's just data moving through time. There's I would go further and say all data is time series, but that's a discussion maybe for another time. But let's just say this is time series data. In terms of processing that, when you're looking at hundreds of millions, over a billion rows in one particular chunk, we use databases and technologies at my work which can make that very, very fast. So so far I haven't had to do anything too crazy to deal with large amounts of data like that. We have databases which are designed for that kind of data, which are extremely quick for that sort of work, very impressively so. But sometimes I'll try to ask a question of the database, and that query does take quite a bit of time to run. And I need to think about how do I ask the question in a different way or structure it in a different way to try and get the answer quicker without actually changing the question I'm answering, but simply asking it of the database in a way that the database can optimize and run more quickly. So there's things you can do like that, or maybe you can break the problems into chunks. I haven't run into a situation where, my query takes days to run, but I have friends in other businesses, some very well-known businesses, you would know the names, I'm not going to mention them, but who do have similarly large data sets, but maybe of a slightly different form. And, they will run queries of that database, and there's a little thing to say, oh, hey, your query took like 2 hours, 3 hours to run, several days a week. Maybe there's things you can do to optimize that. So they're always constantly trying to optimize or ask their questions in certain ways that kind of gets the answer back quicker. So there are different, when you get into the realm of large data, right, there are many different databases and technologies you can use to store that data in, each with their own pros and cons. A lot of them obviously do try to be quick for big queries. The whole big data database paradigm. So things are done on a technological level to mean that the computers can process that query very fast. But there is no real one to rule them all solution, right? It kind of depends on the kind of data you're storing, the sort of queries of that database you think you're going to ask. So for my use case at work, where the vast majority of the data we deal with is time series data, we have a technology solution in place for that, which is very common across finance. It's a KDB database. So anyone who's familiar with finance and that kind of world will know what I'm talking about. Anyone can look it up. We use KDB, and that allows us to work with huge time series very, very quickly.
Wow. It sounds like so much information.
I'm very cognizant. I'm very aware of that. Yeah.
No, it sounds like, but I don't know how this is going to come across, but it's a compliment anyway. But you must have a magnificent mindset when it comes to processing all this data yourself. And although you may turn around to me and say it's not a job that everybody thinks is fantastic, it must be satisfying to know that your brain is able to work in the way that it does to make these things happen for the company itself.
Yeah. Although I will say that, and this is something I've spent many years thinking about, because aside of having worked as an architectural model maker and having worked in film and now working as a data scientist, I also spent time as a teacher, believe it or not. There's a pattern emerging, right? I've done a few different things. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about how people develop skills, right? Or how they can learn things. Are there inherent blockers or traits that lead people down one path or another? And I am currently of the view that almost anything can be learnt by anyone. In my case, I'm used to breaking down problems into kind of smaller chunks and then tackling them and bringing them together and able to think several steps in sort of for technological tasks, right? Let's say you've got, I want to get from A to B. I need to write some computer code to do that. Yeah, generally I can go, okay, well, I need to do join them together, play around with it, and I have seen people sometimes struggle to do that. However, I contend that that is not me inherently like, oh, you're a numbers person. You're an analytical person. You're more an empath. Da, da, da. No, I've just got a shitload more experience doing that than you have. So, and believe me, there's very little in this life that I think has come to me easy or naturally.
Yeah, I can see that by your passion.
I can absolutely tell you this without a shadow of a doubt, right? So, yeah, the radio control flying, I used to do an absolute shitload of. I was so immersed in that and I loved it so much. You just get better at it because you're doing it so much, right? But my degree in aeronautical engineering. So I'll tell you what people used to see. People used to see me come into tutorials, right? So, you have the lecturers run the lecture, then they might give you some questions and they're like, all right, well, based on what we've done in this lecture, try and answer these questions to help develop your understanding or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And there will be like an hour session at some point in time called a tutorial where you can go into and you can ask either the lecturer or one of their PhD students or research associates questions about this material, right? What a fair number of people would do is they would only tackle those questions at the tutorial itself. You've got an hour's worth of time. You've got maybe 10, 15, 20 students in there, maybe one or two people on hand to help you answer it. So they'd start doing the questions. And by the time they start to get to the more difficult material, time was up, they're running out of time. It was always kind of an unfinished thing. What did people see? What did people observe from the outside when I walked into the room? They saw me arrive. They saw me usually be one of the first people to have questions to ask about the material that we'd been provided, have a conversation with either the lecturer or one of their, PhD students or research associates, right? And leave within about 15, 20 minutes into the 1 hour session. They would then they would then experience me in conversation. Like they would ask me questions and I would go, oh yeah, it's like da 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 da. From their perception, oh, this guy, he just gets it, right? He's just a natural. He just knows aeronautical engineering. Bullshit, right? Complete and utter bullshit. What was happening was the lecture would happen. I'd try to dive into those questions straight away. I'd slam my head against the desk repeatedly. I wouldn't understand this. I wouldn't understand that. I would try and work my ass off. So when it came to the tutorial, I would I've already done this, this, and this. I get this, this, and this, but I don't understand these last two things. Can you help me out? So I was just kind of completing my understanding in those tutorials. I was constantly trying to stay one step ahead because there was you got like 40 hours of lectures a week and it's all difficult, challenging material. I was working my ass off. I had plenty of moments of self-doubt, plenty of moments of like, man, this is really difficult. Da, da, da. Even though my grades were working out and I was kind of on track, everything was going well in that regard, you still experience that doubt, right? It's a challenge, right? You don't even know. Yeah. So people had this perception of me. And I can understand why that perception was there. What people don't see is they don't see everything that happens when no one's watching, right? I can't remember who it was who said that. I'm not saying I'm a champion, but, champion, something to do with boxing maybe or something like that. But, it's all the work you do in the gym and the training. It's that last moment, that when you actually get in the ring, people see this wonderful performance. I'm like, oh my gosh, this person's, but you don't see all the work they're doing when no one's watching, right? That's often what the make or break is. So, that all came from obviously what you're asking me about, the way I think, the way I'm able to break down certain problems in certain work contexts, whether that's a database query. Yeah, honestly, I'm a big believer in anyone can make it with the right mindset and putting in the work. I don't generally subscribe to the idea of gifted and talented, which I know is a thing in the education system as we have it now. I think that can actually be quite a damaging thing. If you tell someone all the time, oh, wow, you're really gifted, you're really talented, somewhere down the line, that might manifest itself as they just have this idea that, oh, I can do it all without putting the work in. And that comes back to bite them really hard later on. When actually the going gets tough and they have to put the hard work in, it ain't there. and somebody who just put in the grind beats him to the pip, right? Or not even necessarily competitive sense, but people then get to a point when the work really starts and they quit.
I agree with you there.
But yeah, so, and I've seen this in various different avenues, right? I've seen it in both academic context. I've seen it in various things I've done in my life up to this point, competitive contexts, that somebody might be really good at something just off the bat. But when I was doing, for example, when I was doing loads of the radio controlled flying stuff and going to competitions on the world stage, either as a competitor or as a judge towards the end, it was great. Some of the best radio controlled pilots in the world, I got to know very well as friends. And the common theme amongst people who were literal multiple world champions, some of them who rewrote the rule book on how these competitions are tackled, right? Incredible people. Stupid number of hours. Ridiculous number of training and practice and grit, right? There was no one there who just just do it once in a while and I win everything. Nah, never happened. My view on the idea of innate gifts or innate talent is that, and in the spirit of trying to be philosophical about life in general, I will put the disclaimer in, this view may be subject to change, and fine, okay, it may be subject to change. Somewhere down the line, I might say something different. But right now, at this point in time, if somebody appears to have a knack, or they find something a bit easier the first time they do it than other people might struggle a bit. This person just kind of gets it. That could be just chance, right? Just before you learn to drive, you might you have a conceptual idea of what it's like to use a clutch, what it's like to change gears, what it's like to accelerate, decelerate, how the car might feel. Someone might just happen to have guessed it pretty close to the right way. And that cuts out a lot of the crap early on. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they were born to drive, right? Or that somebody else who didn't have that good guess the first time round doesn't get to that same point. And then perhaps because they have a certain attitude and a way to doing things, an idea of taking a step back from their efforts and able to really analyze what they can do better in a very honest way, doesn't actually go on to do a lot more later on.
No, that makes perfect sense. How do you feel like technology has evolved since when you first started working with it to how it has become in 2020 now? Do you feel like it has enhanced the way you do things within a company, or do you feel like it has hindered?
I don't know if it's not something I actually think about often. So how has technology evolved?
Especially within what you do.
To be fair, and I guess if anything, where I'm at right now, it feels like technology actually isn't as used as much as people might think it is. And I can give you a very specific kind of example of that. It's interesting to me, how many people day to day in their jobs do things which could easily be automated. And I'm not talking fancy AI algorithm. I'm really simple stuff, right? Rather than you opening a spreadsheet, typing a bunch of things in there, you could actually do a lot of automation. So I think actually technology in a really basic way isn't used to its fullest extent. So quite the contrary. I mean, how has technology affected us in the wider context, right? In everyone's daily life? Well, yeah, we've all seen the rise of the smartphone, right? The more interconnectivity and social media and all these other things. Do I think that has an impact? Yeah, I do think to a degree. I know every generation has, kids watching TV, your brain's going to fall out your ears, right? And it's like we're getting to the point of being the angry old people. Oh, we didn't have the smartphones when we were kids. It's like, yeah, it could just be more of the same, right? However, I mentioned I spent time in teaching.
Yeah,
I did get the impression, and again, statistical, philosophical disclaimer, it's only a sample size as I experienced it, right? So this is only based on my experiences. I don't know if this is a wider trend. The question needs to be asked, the test needs to be done. But I did feel that, so at one point I was working in year 6 and I felt that some of these kids, they had an inability to concentrate on stuff that seemed a bit much. And, they're all going home and interacting with their devices which is something I didn't do. And, you know, it's like, I don't know how much of an impact that has. Is that really, you know, it did feel that way, that this could be something which truly is different. Because, yeah, TV might rot your brain, but you can't take a TV everywhere with you. Well, now you can on your phone, but, you know, TV as it was when we were growing up, you know, you sit down, you watch the TV, all right, you turn the TV off, you do something else. It's not constantly available for you to interact with. That's where I think the things are different now than they have been. But technology, look, I don't take the view technology is inherently good or evil. It's just a thing, right? It's just a thing. Knives aren't good or evil. They're just a thing. I can try and cook a lovely meal using a knife. That's part of the process. Or you can commit a crime, right?
That's true.
Technology has its uses to certainly alleviate us from certain things. I don't necessarily think it's the solution to everything. I think ultimately solutions to things have to come from within us as people, right? It's how we use things and interact with the world around us.
That's true.
A full disclaimer, so I work in a technical field and I have certain level of technical experience, but actually generally in my day-to-day life, like I feel that I perceive that I'm relatively analog. So I don't like actually rely on apps and stuff like this and other things that much, even though I work as a data scientist. Like when I'm doing my fitness stuff, I actually don't record much of the data, believe it or not, which is just like a thing for me. It's like, you know, I can judge my progress across time in different ways. So it's kind of, a thing like that. I'm not a technophobe, but I don't feel the need to do as much with technology and apps and other stuff as perhaps other people might as well. Or I use very simple methods to do that.
If I could ask you, if you could choose one quote that represents you as a person, what quote would you choose, and why would you choose that particular quote?
There are lots of different quotes.
Talk to me.
There are lots, and sometimes I got to tell myself off for like trying to converse with people in quotes. Right, it seems a bit pretentious at times. Let me look one up. So I've got a few to hand here.
Okay.
So you asked a quote.
Yeah.
So yeah. To not to say a quote fully defines a person or a thing, but I guess one quote which resonates. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a few, right? But I'll pick one here. Just get some water down me.
Yeah, you and me both.
So here it goes. Yeah. To those human beings who are of any concern to me, I wish suffering, desolation, sickness, ill treatment, indignities. I wish that they should not remain unfamiliar with profound self-contempt, the torture of self-mistrust, and the wretchedness of the vanquished. I have no pity for them, because I wish them the only thing that can prove today whether one is worth anything or not, that one endures. And that's from Friedrich Nietzsche.
Wow. I think that's one of the best quotes I've heard someone say, because everyone usually gives me just a line, whereas you've given me a paragraph.
Oh, right.
No, which is good, because you see things in a different way. You analyze things before you say it, I believe. And
I sometimes try to, right? But we all sometimes
forget
what it is we're trying to do at the same time.
Yeah, sometimes it's the moment, and we just become passionate, I should say, about what we're feeling, and our emotions take over. So then we just say what's from the heart, and sometimes we don't always realize that what we're saying can offend someone or do something to someone in a different way or in an emotional way. But I like that quote. That's something that possibly will stick with me. Are there any companies that you admire, that you would say you would like to work for because of the way that they do things in the terms of...
Yeah, I don't know if... I mean, there are companies with some inspiring stories and stuff like this, but I guess not necessarily. I'd say it's actually more about people. So let me, again, qualify that somewhat. One of the things, when I spent time in film, one of the things I came to appreciate was how you enjoy your work based on the people around you. So I often worked in very harsh environments, right? Spent time in the jungle, 30 degrees plus, 100% humidity, spent time on a ski slope, 2 a.m. in the morning, minus whatever, spent a lot of time in the desert, 40, 45 plus degrees, harsh environments, right? If the people around you on the set were a good bunch of folks, it didn't necessarily matter as much how hard the conditions were or how challenging that particular shoot was. You had a laugh, right? You enjoyed it. So if I was to put it a different way, like you could be shoveling horse shit for a job, but if you're having a laugh whilst you're doing it with the people, it's not so bad. And that's one of the things I sort of was aware of and tried to look for to a degree when it came to transitioning from film world to, you know, office world or corporate world.
I want to talk about that more as well.
Yeah, we will, absolutely. But and I'm glad to say I have found that, like the people I work with right now, you know, we get on very well, and that's more important to me necessarily than the company itself. Yes, a company can absolutely influence a culture, but I think in your immediate day-to-day surroundings, it's going to be the people that are around you, right, that really matter the most.
Of course.
But I did think about your question when you posed it to me earlier, and I don't know if this qualifies right now as a company in traditional sense or not, but an organization which I've long just been blown away by, and it's kind of not well known, you know, in the general public sphere, is Bell Labs. And if one of my friends is listening to this down the line, he'll be smiling because we talk about Bell Labs often. But Bell Labs was the, you know, the kind of the research division of the Bell company, you know, which has its roots back. And it's obscene the amount of inventions or technologies that have been discovered that have come out of Bell Labs that have shaped the modern era. It's uncanny. Like that was, it's just, it was an incredible place. The people that went through there, the work that came out the ground, like modern life would not be as it looks now were it not for Bell Labs. Just one, like there needs to be a Netflix, you know, series on this or something like that, right? It's just a very interesting place. And, you know, if anyone gets a chance, I recommend look it up and look at the kind of accomplishments or the things that came out of Bell Labs, the inventions that came out of Bell Labs and the work that was done in Bell Labs. So yeah,
I'm definitely going to look it up.
Go check it out.
Tell me a little bit. Now we've spoken about it briefly just a second ago. So tell me the transition between the film to where you are now.
Sure. So I guess in order to maybe get more of a handle on the transition, it makes sense to talk about how I ended up in film because at this point in the conversation, that's still unknown. So I did my 3 years aeronautical engineering. I graduated. Started applying for jobs, just, you know, didn't really have a strong idea. Funnily enough, I didn't actually want to go into aeronautical engineering. I'd kind of got a bit disillusioned with it as I've been doing the degree for various reasons. Wasn't at that point sure it was really what I wanted to do, was to go into the industry as an engineer. Good friends of mine of the course did pursue that. Some went into various forms of engineering. I do sometimes miss it, or like, oh, you know, that's cool. Would have been nice to work on that. But, you know, it is what it is, and it's all good. So I actually spent a brief spell working for what I got into, and I worked for a sales company, an IT sales company. And I was actually on the third week of their training program, or the final week of their training program. So they were training us up, and they put us up in a hotel near the headquarters for about 2 to 3 weeks, where we were getting trained up. And I was sitting on the loo, right, in the hotel room, and I get a call, or I think it was a text message off one of the guys from my university, and he'd ended up after uni. So he was actually a year ahead of me, but we were in the same halls. He ended up working as a trainee cameraman for a small outfit, for a small, like little rental house / crew, right? And they had a drone, and they bought the drone, but they weren't too sure about how to operate it or how to get it working and get some work out of it. Now, so he knew me. We were good friends at university, and he knew I did a lot of the radio controlled flying stuff because I always had that stuff lit around my room. So he was well aware of that was something I did. So he messaged me, says, "Hey, yeah, how's it going? Blah blah. We've got this drone. I think maybe you can figure out how this thing works and to get it flying. Would you be interested in giving us a hand?" I was like, "That sounds insane and awesome. But I'm in the middle of a full-time job right now, so this sucks. But yeah, maybe I can chat with you a little bit here and there. But as something that could lead to work and stuff, I've got a full-time job. Sorry." To cut the story a little bit shorter, I didn't stay long in the job I was training for. So when I quit, I immediately contacted him and said, "Hey, is that thing still going? Like, is that office still up? Like, do you still need someone to help you out with your drone?" And he goes, "Yeah, maybe. Let me find out." One thing led to another. So I took this drone, I got it working, I test flew it and and checked out a bunch of things on it, made some modifications, right? And got it to a point where it could go out and it could work on film and TV jobs and make them money. And they asked me to fly it. So did all that, got like at that point how the licensing was done, did all of that and stuff. So I'm kind of flying, I'm going out onto like odds and sods, like different little TV jobs here and there, right? Aerial pickup shots and this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. Which at the time was like, oh, mine was blown. This is awesome. It's like, oh, I'm getting to do something I'm really into. I'm being paid to do it. There's a little bit of travel involved, going around the UK. That's quite cool. This is awesome, right? This is like, and it's not like a 9-to-5, right? It's kind of different, and you can, all really good, like super excited, 22 years old, can't believe I've landed this thing. So that in itself, how I got into that was very serendipitous, right? It's kind of luck and coincidence. But at that time, it was more TV based work. It gets even more serendipitous as to how I then transitioned to more film based work and more international and larger productions. I can't remember exactly what the date was, but I remember I one of those weird things that just line up, right? I got up one day a little bit earlier than I've been getting up, just by chance, right? So I got up and I was awake, having breakfast, and so I was awake, so I was able to answer my phone. So I got a call from a random number I'd never seen before, picked it up. It was a producer on a shoot in London, saying, "Oh, hey, I was given your contact details by XYZ. I know you do work for blah blah blah, and like we have a drone on set, but it's crashed. We need someone who can fill in very, very short notice, as in the next few hours. Could you do it?" So I just happened to be awake to get the call. Great. The drone was with me, fully charged, ready to go. All the things like, yeah, okay, let's go do it. So packed it all up, got to the location. Very, really windy day. It's kind of crazy. But the guys who had the drone crash were there, and I was kind of talking with them and stuff. They're like, "Oh, where'd you get that drone? Who built it?" "I did." "Really?" "Yeah." "Oh, you built it?" "Yeah." And I was flying it and stuff, and it's like, "Look," they said, we've got this crash thing. We want you to fix it for us. And maybe we like the way you fly, and maybe you can start flying for us. And that's where things really started to spiral. And that was about middle of 2013. So I got that drone, I fixed it up. Within, like, I'd say a month of meeting them, or a month and a half, and I'd done a fair bit of work of getting the drone ready, they were already talking about, "Oh, there's a film job coming up for like this, or a TV job coming up for this," in like parts of the world I'd never even bloody been to. So it's like, whoa, really? Like, this was a bit crazy, right? And it completely spiraled from there. Been to many different countries, worked on feature films, nature documentaries, music videos all around the world, some high profile stuff, things I couldn't have even begin to imagine in my wildest dreams that I'd be doing, we did.
Yeah.
And it sounds all very rosy and wonderful, but I will absolutely tell you that there were plenty of points at during my time in film and TV as the drone guy, where it was 18-hour days, right? Mm. Like the
That's a long time.
Seriously shitty working conditions, extremely stressful, dangerous at times. You really got to look after yourself. One of the first bigger jobs that I did, I was in another part of the world, completely. And we turned up, we flew in with so the drones were operated as two people, right? So I would fly the drone, so I would physically put it, in the air where it needed to be.
Yeah.
A separate person would point the camera. So it's kind of like this. If you ever seen the film Pacific Rim, where like the two minds melt, it's like that. It's kind of like that. We can get into more of what that means in a moment. But in that particular job, I spent 5 days on that job. In that 5 days, I slept 8 hours total.
What?
Which, when you're operating a newly built drone with a 30,000 pound plus camera with a 10,000 pound lens on it, in a completely unknown environment, it's crazy. And like fatigue I've never experienced before. So there were incredible highs, incredible lows. We were one of the first people to fly one of the first people to fly a Red Dragon Carbon, which had just come out, like a super light version of the Red Dragon camera. We did that off a ski slope in Austria, which was 10,000 feet altitude, which another well-known drone crew had turned down because they said, we're not sure that's possible. It's the only time I've ever used my aeronautical engineering degree. People always make that natural jump. Oh, you did a degree in aeronautical engineering, like, designing planes and stuff. That must obviously be used by your drone flying. It's like, no, actually, the majority of the drone work has come from me doing radio control planes as a hobbyist. But the only actual time I've actually used my degree was to calculate, can this drone fly at this altitude in these air conditions and have enough lift to lift this camera up safely. It's the only time I've ever explicitly used my degree. But we did that. We were amongst the first, if not really the first, to fly two red cameras together. So you put two red cameras together side by side, you can shoot 3D. Now, I know at the time there was another crew who done something, so we'd seen video of a drone flying red cameras, but it wasn't on a production. Whereas we had to go out and do this in the middle of the jungle for 2 weeks, which made the final cut. It's was shown in IMAX and blah blah and that kind of stuff. So I was very fortunate to have done some incredible things, but there were also lots of periods of doubt and struggle and very difficult conditions and a lot of learning, I guess, right? The highs and lows, and I learned a lot about what a good leader looks like, because the leader on set is a director. What's a good director versus a bad director? Well, a leader leads from the front, a bad leader pushes from behind, right?
Yes,
and
that's
some
true.
of the best directors I work with, it's 40-45 degree heat in the desert, and they're out there in that heat with the cameras shooting. They're not sitting in an air-conditioned tent, which is what some of them did, sit in an air-conditioned tent in the middle of a 40-degree desert, barking orders over a walkie-talkie. And it's interesting how much of what I learned in film I've actually taken to the office in corporate environment, right? It's all about people. People always ask me, what was film like? It's all about people. It's all about getting on with people. And in the end, you kind of hope that when the shoot is over and everything is wrapped, you've created a story with other people. And that is a wonderful feeling. You're telling stories, and you're telling stories doing it with other people, like working with other people to create something, larger than each of your individual selves. So very glad I was a part of that. What led me to transition out of that towards the end? So yeah, I make it all sound very good and very interesting, but it was incredibly predictable work, right? Like some of the biggest, most high profile jobs I've done, you pack your bags, you come home, you put your feet up, and the phone doesn't ring for 2-3 months. It's just like that, right? I know you've had other people on the podcast. You've probably said very similar things. Extremely volatile, right? So you don't know where the next paycheck's coming from. You don't really know what's going on. That was a big factor in me trying to go, well, do I want to get to the point when 10, 15 years down the line, this could all dry up really bad, just not of my own accord, and I've got nothing to fall back on. So that was sort of the start of me thinking, I knew a guy who had actually won an Oscar for technical achievement. So not, the Oscars actually is a bigger thing. So you get Oscars for all the technical side and the crew as well. The only guy I know who's ever won an Oscar for flying radio controlled aircraft like drones. He doesn't fly drones, flies actually little radio controlled helicopters, but been doing it longer than any of the new school like myself were, right? He'd been doing it for way longer. Incredible bloke. You know, even he was struggling to find work at points. It's like, well, shit, if it can happen to someone like him with a huge credit roll, you know, it can happen, you know, to anyone. And then there were other things going on at that point in time, which kind of got me thinking that, you know, I don't want to necessarily stay with this for now. I can always, I guess, go back to it. Film is not something you have to do 24/7 to be a part of it, which is something we might touch on a bit later, cause the sort of stuff I'm doing now outside of work and the rest of the things. But yeah, that was kind of the big sort of impetus. And, you know, I had, at that point, I was sort of four years and a bit into the game, you know, and a lot of people around me who kind of chosen, you know, the path more trodden, who'd gone into careers and stuff like that, I was immediately becoming envious of and comparing myself to, and that led to a lot of self-doubt, and a very difficult time in my life was sort of having to step away from film and not knowing what the future might hold, and having a whole amount of self-doubt, right? And very, very dark time. And I would describe it as, imagine what it's like to have absolutely no hope for the future. Well, that was toward the end. That's what I had, right? I wasn't sure what was going to come next, but you know, here I am now. So there's something in that, right? It's like, you know, who was I at the age of 28 years old, no experience in finance whatsoever or a corporate environment, right? Who was trying to break into finance. You know, I always felt like I'm such an outsider, and yet here I am, right? You know, I'm going to very much condense it, but did the masters, you know, met people in there who were very encouraging and stuff like this, and found a way in. So if I can transition from a film career to a technical job in finance, then that's one way of illustrating, you know, there are perceptions of the world, and then there are what you can actually do. And it's amazing what people do when you just stop adhering to narratives about yourself. I know people who've spent, like one of my good friends during my time in film, who was often my camera operator on a lot of the drone shoots I did, who had more experience in film than me. So he was kind of helping me out with that. And I was learning from him and he was learning from me about drones. He's become since a very, very close friend. He came out of film around about the same time I did for similar sort of reasons. He's now in medical school he's now studying to be, you know, a doctor without any of the proper prerequisites because he found a way in. And he's doing that, right? And he's like, you know, wow, you know, a guy at that point in his life doing that, yeah, fuck it. Like, it shouldn't be allowed, but it is. It does happen. You know, there's perceptions and reality about what you can achieve.
What would you say to someone who is going into a similar field like you? So if someone is going into data science and they're just starting, what advice would you give them to keep going? Because as you've just said, you've had ups and you've had downs. But what would you say to someone who is just starting to get into data science? What advice would you give them to tell them to keep going?
I guess you could say that's more generally for anything, any endeavor that someone chooses to pursue, right?
Yeah.
How do you cope with the doubt? Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's something, you know, something though I have familiarity to trying to kind of encapsulate it. It's an interesting proposition. So I guess first of all, really understand what is motivating you. You know, why are you doing what you're doing, and be very honest about those reasons. You know, for me, transitioning to data science to pursue a career in something, you know, an office-based environment in finance, completely different, very specific things, right? I wanted to pick up a skill set that would mean that I didn't have all my eggs in one basket. You know, I haven't spoken about it much in here, but I've always I did explore careers in finance previously, hence why I've ended up here now. data science seemed like a natural thing to do because was very much in demand. I had a curiosity about it, statistics in more general, and it built upon some technical acumen I had from my area in Auckland. So things kind of, meshed together to take me in that direction. But there's a very clear purpose behind it, right? It's like transition out of film, get into, a career that's hopefully much more stable generally, provides you with a skill set you can fall back on, and can give you some sort of career progression and meet the objectives that you want to meet and do the things you want to do. So I guess if anyone's experiencing doubt, I mean, one of the things I would first is like, what it is, why is it you're doing what you're doing? And don't lie to yourself about that, right? And don't give me some cliche bullshit answer like follow your passion, which I think is terrible advice, but generally, by the way. Like really, get to the heart of what it is you're doing. Understand there's going to be difficult periods of self-doubt. Maybe just for that one day, back off a little bit. Maybe that day you need to push through. There's no, I guess, in listening to myself speak, there is no silver bullet, right? There is. I don't think there's a silver bullet, because if I was, I'd probably be saying it. But then we could refer to my Nietzsche quote earlier, which is that one endures, right? He's talking about profound, self-mistrust and the rest of it. It's a normal part of being in life. It's something we all experience. Give it your best bloody shot, basically.
Yeah.
If you've tried to do something and you've fallen short, but you can look back at your efforts and say, you know what, I gave it a bloody good run.
Yeah.
I didn't leave anything in the field. It just didn't work out. That can be quite a liberating thing. It's worse when you know that you could have maybe done a bit more, maybe tried something else. It's also perfectly fine to get to a point of failure in an endeavor and say, actually, maybe I was never, like, if you can honestly, genuinely look back and go, I was never really into that idea anyway. I like the idea, but I was never actually truly into that thing, right? Like, we all like the idea of, I want to do this, I want to do that. But I kind of say, and it seems a bit harsh, if you truly want to do something, you'll go out and do it. Fine. But you might discover in that process, actually, that thing isn't for me. And that's okay too. I think, so in the last couple of years, I've, I kind of have a sort of self-created framework or a lens, a way of framing human, the human experience in the day-to-day, right? So what does that mean? So you could argue that everything that we do has some unknown, and it is unknown, really. I mean, we can get close to it, but generally unknown probability of going in our favor or not, right? So if you're trying to get to some point, right, you want to get from point A to point B, you can, starting at point A, all right, well, what are the different routes to path B? Which one do I think is the most likely? Okay, it's reasonable. If I think it's going to be this, let's give that a shot. Through my own actions, I can also try to improve my odds, right? That's how we interact with the world, by improving our odds. Let's say in all the steps to get me from point A to point B, maybe that's got a 10% chance of success or a 90% chance of success. I don't really know. But let's take an example, it has a 90% chance of success. I might have done everything bang on right, and I didn't get to that point B. But I guess what I'm trying to make the distinction here is that's not necessarily a reason to beat yourself up, but only if in your absolute coldest, most honest and critique of yourself, which sometimes people struggle to do, but only with that, if you look at every step you took and say, I gave it my best bloody shot, and I just fell up short, that's fine. I don't even know where I'm going with all this. It's just something I kind of view. It's how I kind of try to navigate things, right? If we take another idea from a related idea, I think people generally, it all sounds a bit preachy to a degree, isn't it? I think people this, I think people that. Okay, well, I'm not trying to be, believe me, but
no, you have an opinion.
Yeah,
it's
you
fair
can say
enough.
that.
Yeah,
and I'm always try to be open to it being challenged by all means. But I think there's sometimes a contradiction, this below the level contradiction in people, in that they say people want to believe in the power, like, to change whatever it is they want to change, right? Whether it's changing themselves or like, yeah, I believe I can do this if I just do that, right? I want the power. I want to have the power to make the world what I want it to be. You know, my environment, my reality around me. People say that all the time, right? But I think below the surface, that's not always the case, because the quote, I think it was Spider-Man's uncle. No, was it Spider? Yeah, might have been Spider-Man's uncle. With great power comes great responsibility, right? If you say you want to do, you want the power, like, or you say you have power to do all these things. With that comes great. The responsibility is on you, right? The onus is on you to do the actions, to do the things, right? Don't expect the world to change in your favor, or don't expect things just to happen to you. Get off your ass and to do them. But in that, you also have to accept the responsibility for it. And so I think sometimes what happens is this contradiction. People say, yeah, I'm going to go try this, and this. And when it doesn't work out, they immediately blame everybody else or everything else.
That's denial.
Pardon?
Denial. When somebody is in denial.
Yeah. It's like, oh, and then it's like, no, it's like, I'm not saying it's all one way or the other. I'm not saying that we have absolute power to change everything, and I'm not saying that we are completely powerless. It's somewhere in between. I think things are somewhere in between, right? And it's kind of, for me, at least for me, it's only been through experience and continued experience where it's like, well, how do you know when you could have done more? How do you know when you just got unlucky? Well, you don't really, but you just try to navigate your way through life with this kind of thing, and it helps. I have no idea where I was going with any of that, by the way.
It doesn't even matter, because it made sense anyways.
Oh, good.
It made sense. So I've only got one more question for you because of time, unfortunately. Yeah. But where can we find you on all your social medias and all your, like, say, for instance, your Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn? If people want to get in contact with you.
No Facebook, no Instagram, no social media whatsoever. The only thing I have is a LinkedIn profile. Just because that's the world, that's part of the world I inhabit, right? The professional network. So I guess if somebody does want to find me, that's a way to do it. But you won't find me on Twitter or Facebook or any of that stuff. At least not right now.
Maybe that's a good thing.
Perhaps, yeah. Again, it's just a choice. It's a personal choice with reasons behind it.
Of course.
So yeah.
Well, that makes sense. I want to thank you so much for coming on the Us People podcast. The knowledge that you have brought to this episode has been immense, and I know a fact that when people listen to this, if they don't walk away with some kind of knowledge, they're lying. So,
thank you. It's very kind.
No,
and thank you for having me as well. It's just sort of came completely out of the blue, but it's been really good fun being on here and to have the conversation we've had. So thank you again.
No, you're most welcome. I've really enjoyed it because you've told me so many things that I didn't understand, or you have. No, it's good because sometimes people have a different outlook on life and things that happen to them, whereas you have your outlook on things on life, and sometimes you don't realize how much you actually have in common with someone.
Yes, it's very true.
And even if you don't know them.
So if I may just maybe take another minute or two just to sort of something that's on my mind, I'd just like to
Go for
get
it.
out there. A friend of mine has asked me before on a number of occasions, like, do you ever miss working in film? And initially, at the start, but I guess over time, I'm glad I had the experience and got to do the things I did. But where am I going at with this? So I'm glad for the experiences. I don't really necessarily miss them per se, but I would also say for people who are wanting to do film and wanting to do creative things like that, you absolutely do not have to don't think that the only way for me to do films and to tell stories is to be working in the industry. There are people I know who've said, you know what, I'm going to do the pragmatic job thing, and in my spare time, I'm going to pursue what it is I really want to pursue, whatever that be, right? Whether that be film or something else. And that's totally fine and can often be quite advantageous because it frees you up somewhat from being chained to the thing. you know, you can make your money one way and you can go use that to pursue the things you want to do. You don't have to, it's not this absolutist notion of, oh, if I have to pursue my passion, I have to do it all the time for it to mean anything. No, not necessarily. What does that mean for me? I still, you know, I didn't realize, I didn't know film was going to happen to me.
Yeah.
But I found something in it that I really, really liked. And I guess it was just telling stories with other people. And I can still do that. I'm still, you know, working on a few bits and pieces and short films with friends and stuff like that. And in no way has it detracted from the fact that I'm not doing this as a full-time job anymore. So I would say that to anybody else, like, you know, if you've got a thing you want to pursue, by all means pursue it, but don't wait for it to become everything that you do. You can still do those things. You know, I work as you'll hear me say, I work as a data scientist, not I am a data scientist. It's a job I do. You can do various jobs extremely well and extremely capable without necessarily being completely defined or consumed by them. Those are all just stories, really.
If the opportunity came up again for you, if the opportunity came where someone gave you a call and said, listen, I want to work with you again on a film set, would you take the opportunity to do it, or would you turn it down?
I mean, it would very much depend on the opportunity, right? And what it would very much depend on the opportunity, and also, you know, how do I balance that versus what I'm doing currently right now? Because you know, where I am at this point in time, things are going pretty good. I can't complain, you know, things are going pretty good. So it wouldn't just be simply, oh, it's an opportunity to get back in film. It would have to be much something else, something that really caught my attention. And I guess I would say something very, very, very compelling, because I would have to potentially give up a lot, which would take some doing. You never know. But I guess that's my take on it. But I will say, like I said, with some friends and select people, you know, we're still working on odds and sods. You can still shoot short films and do creative things, and arguably sometimes from a better place, because I'm not worrying about the next paycheck to paycheck. You know, I have a steady salary. Yeah. That means we can plan. We can maybe do things that we weren't as able to easily do before, and we can still go out and do what it is we want to do. Yeah. Right. No, that makes total sense.
Thank you so much again for coming on the show and for actually sharing that last bit of knowledge.
No problem. My pleasure.
So, because I believe that will also help a lot of people because a lot of the time when I'm talking to people at the moment, there is a lot of self-doubt. Yeah. And it's sad to know that people feel so doubtful about themselves, and especially with the whole pandemic and
absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
what's going on.
There's a friend of mine, and we have conversations often about various things. And the thing that keeps coming up is, you know, doubt. It's interesting how much it's actually incredible how much people limit themselves, not because of any actual existential reason, but simply because they are not acting. And how often that not acting, not doing, comes from self-doubt. Me transitioning to finance seemed like an absolutely impossible task. Yet it happened. So there was my perception, my doubt could have held me back. But when you actually go and you actually try things, generally it's amazing. Well, you'd be surprised what can come out the other end, because you're not chained to this narrative of something which may not actually be as true as you think it is.
Yeah. I want to thank you again for coming on the Ask People podcast, because I know I'm going to listen to this and be like, yeah, he said some things that definitely resonated with me. So
thank you.
Thank you so much. And guys, thank you so much for listening to the Ask People podcast. Please remember you can listen and subscribe to Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, and any other platform that you prefer to listen to. Please also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And you can also donate to the Ask People podcast so we can continue to have conversations with people just like we have today, to inspire people to keep on going and stay positive. You can do that by simply going to the Savia Rocks website or typing in paypal.me/uspeoplepodcast. Thank you for listening. Stay happy, stay positive, and as always, please continue to be kind to one another.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope. Yeah, if people can take something away from the discussion that does help them in some way, then absolutely wonderful.